do with a little bit more of.
Okay, here's an interesting story. Most of us are proud to say that we treat everyone equally. But what if you found out that you had a sort of unconscious bias against some people because of their gender or the colour of their skin? If you're at home right now saying, well, that's not me, well, then this story is for you.
Humans have this tendency to group ourselves: skin colour, religiosity, class. We tend to have ideas or thoughts that favour our own group and ideas and thoughts that often do not favour the out group.
So does that mean everyone's just a little bit racist?
I wouldn't say so. We have too much information, we can't deal with it all, and we have ways of using shortcuts.
Science says these shortcuts are a normal process of the human mind. In simpler times, they helped us stay alive. Anything with fangs, run away. Anything red, don't eat. Any stranger, run away. And don't eat him.
Everyone has information processing biases. Not everyone is a racist.
But the modern world is complex and interconnected, and these biases can cause us problems.
These mental shortcuts can sometimes be based on stereotypes, and they're sort of unfairly attributed to a particular group or a particular individual. That's where the bias comes in.
So, news story after news story about Islamic terrorism. Result? Some see all Muslims as a threat. None of us are immune. In his autobiography, Nelson Mandela remembers panicking the first time he saw a black pilot. How could a black man fly an airplane? But a moment later, I caught myself. I had fallen into the apartheid mindset, thinking Africans were inferior and that flying was a white man's job. Everyday biases affect the most fundamental parts of people's lives, like applying for a job.
Looking at people that have got foreign names and assuming that they won't speak good English, so I won't interview them. And people do that.
Or in school.
Māori and Pacifica students in particular talk about lowered expectations and a feeling that they're being judged and dumbed down before they start.
Or in the courts.
If you are Māori or Pacific Island, you are more likely to be perceived as someone who will commit crime and therefore be found guilty based on that bias.
Biases are our skewed perspective of the world, but instead of allowing reality to correct them, our brains pick and choose what we see. They call that confirmation bias.
Let's just say you think that East Asians, Chinese people, are really bad drivers. And so you remember the bad Chinese driver, but you forget the bad Pakeha driver.
And like 1,000 cuts, years of being the target of bias can have tragic effects.
Quale delle due è bella?
Questa. When you have stereotypical ideas about particular groups constantly being circulated within society, even the individuals from that group start to internalize those biases.
E qual è quella buona? Quale è cattiva?
So it turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy because you start to think being me or being in the skin, there's something wrong with that.
Perché è cattiva?
Perché tutto nero.
I'm not the norm. My citizenship is not as valid or viable as other people.
Che ti somiglia di più?
Even though we're wired to create groups, which our brains turn into biases, or worse, for the most part, lions aren't a thing anymore. Here's the good news though, you're evolved. You can choose to unwire them.
The first thing to do is catch that thought and don't let it affect your behaviour, especially any kind of behaviour that would negatively disadvantage a particular person.
The second step is just learn to know the facts. What are the facts?
Hey Siri, how come everyone else is such an awful driver?
Reese, just last week you crashed into a parked car.
The last thing is when all of this stuff fails and you want to, yell out the window at that darn Asian driver that just cut you off, the thing you do is just chill. Understand that we're not all perfect, that if we're under stress, a lot of these stereotypes and base rates might come out in the worst possible way.
Yeah. And if you want to put yourself to the test, you can literally do that. There's an online test that we're going to put a link to on our Facebook page. You can take it to find out whether you associate black people and white people, like those kids in the piece did, with being criminals or being bad or being ugly. I did that test. I'm right down the middle. I'm not biased one way or another, but I failed really badly on another test.
What?
So it turns out that my little brain thinks that scientists, doctors, professionals, authority figures are all male and not female, which is something that I'm really working on. So I talked to a couple of experts and their best advice was to practice a bit of mindfulness. Some people call that meditation. That means that when you catch yourself thinking with that thought process, you can unpack it, and I'll be way more, much more of a feminist in the future.
Yeah, interesting. Check it out on our Facebook page if you want to do the test yourself.
Us B-list Kiwi celebrities